Most leaders say they want strong people under them, but the second that someone makes a mistake, they are quick to take control. And that is exactly why they never develop leaders. Before I flew the F-16, I controlled airstrikes as a JTAC in combat zones. And one thing that military leadership taught me quick was that you do not build leaders through lectures. You build leaders through decision reps under pressure. Now, one day, I had a junior ranking JTAC on my team who defied my recommendation on a combat airstrike. It was borderline insubordination. But I made the deliberate choice. I let him go with his idea. He gave clearance, direct hit, 4 bombs, $160,000 of smart weapons. But nothing happened. Now, today, I'm going to show you why overprotective leadership creates weak men, why discernment matters more than perfection, and what that $160,000 mistake taught me about developing leaders. If you miss this principle, you will spend your whole life managing people instead of multiplying leaders. So let me start with the story. Once upon a time, there we were calling in airstrikes. This is a real world in a foreign land at war situation, and I was in charge of a small team. Now, one of the JTACs who was working for me, he was on the mic controlling the airstrike. We had F-16s on station, and our target, it was a large building that looked very similar to a courthouse. And the JTAC wanted to use a couple of GBU-39s to destroy the building. If you have no idea what that means, it just means it's a small bomb, 250 pounds. They usually come in a 4-pack. And our most common bomb that we employ in the Air Force are usually of the 500-pound variety. So these 250-pounders, these are small little guys, but they really pack a punch. They're GPS guided, which just means they can hit stationary targets all weather. It doesn't matter if there are clouds and the pilot can't see the target, the GPS can guide them where to go. And they're also good at penetrating hard targets, specifically for this type of weapon. Now, if you were to ask the JTAC that day, he was thinking that these GBU-39s was a great solution to the problem that he was trying to solve. However, I had a lot of experience employing specifically GBU-39s against buildings, okay? Same weapon, similar target type, and I advised him, don't do it. Why? Based on the target composition. So, you see, to employ this weapon effectively, it requires that you understand how the bomb will destroy its target. Now, in this case, a small 250-pound bomb like the GBU-39, it's good for overpressure. And so without getting too scientific or technological, what that means is that if the target is completely enclosed on all 4 sides and has a roof, then the GBU-39, it really punches above its weight class. Because it has this excellent overpressure effect, it can take down medium or even large size buildings. Well, if you did some target analysis and imagery study, then you would have seen that our target that day had a bunch of pillars on the outside, these column-like structures. And I could not be sure, but it looked to me from the imagery, and sometimes the imagery is outdated and who knows what, but it looked like the target did not have 4 enclosing walls. It appeared that one of the sides was a colonnade. And if that was true, that would mean that the GBU-39 would actually be a horrible weapon of choice for this target. Thus, I advised my JTAC against using that weapon type. But this dude, like most JTACs, very headstrong, very stubborn, really strong dude. And so he's like, no. And I could have pulled rank on him and said, this is what you will do. But I went ahead and let him make the decision. He second-guessed himself a little bit, so he asked the pilots, the F-16 pilots, their opinion, because they are a team trying to take down this target together. And from their vantage point, they said, hey, it looks good, we're down. Let's do the GBU-39s, which now as a pilot, I completely understand slant range and targeting pods, and now I see why they couldn't see. In the plane, there's a very small screen on which they're trying to view this target that could be multiple miles away, and they're trying to get a good look at it. So the punchline is that my enlisted JTAC, he defied me. He went against my advice. He called in those 4 GBU-39s, and here's what happened. They were a direct hit, but it didn't destroy the target. And at first, we saw, like, on the roof, we saw the 4 little smoking holes, and we thought, nothing happened. Maybe it was 4 duds, like 4 dudded weapons, which statistically is highly improbable, but I guess it could be possible. Well, turns out they all hit the target. They all functioned exactly as they were designed to. All 4 bombs exploded, but one side of the building was indeed a colonnade. And so that overpressure effect that I described completely useless. And what happened is we wasted about $160,000 of smart bombs that day, but worse, we didn't kill the target. So why would I let that happen? I was the officer in charge. Why would I approve of this plan? Now, I tell you this story because it's an example of giving someone a rep at making a decision. It's an example of developing a leader. And the moral of the story is that leaders are not forged by theory or academics alone. They're forged by decisions, getting out in the real world and doing the thing. Okay, so we're going to talk through 5 different points, things that we can learn from this story, that as leaders, if we want to build leaders around us, what would be wise things for us to do? And this will apply to wherever you're at in life, whether you run a business, whether you're a father or a parent, whether you're a military leader also, or whether you're just trying to contribute to the team that you're on and empower others around you to develop in leadership. So the first of 5 points is this, that leadership is reps, not information. Okay. These days, you don't need another podcast. You don't need another book. You don't need another training. You need reps if your goal is to create leaders or to develop a leadership skill. Now, leadership, let's think about it this way. It is not learned through theory. It is forged through decisions under pressure. Okay, so if you take any learned skill in life that a human can acquire, and the question is, how do we get better at that thing? The answer is reps. You get better through repetition. Okay, so this applies to anything. If you're into fitness, how do you get better? If you want to get stronger, then you need to do more reps. If you want to get faster, you need to do more reps. Anything, if we were talking about the gym, if you want to improve your fitness level, how do you do it? Through repetition, okay? If in my life, I am a beginner F-16 pilot, and if I want to get better at the thing, there's a measure of success that comes from studying, but studying only gives some success. The real success comes from doing the thing, getting in the simulator, or better yet, getting in the actual airplane and getting reps. And the story I just told as a JTAC, some of those things you don't learn in training if you are dropping practice bombs, training rounds, or if you're practicing with simulated weapon employment. And so certain reps as a JTAC only come through combat. The same thing we could talk about parenting, where it's like, if you want to get better as a parent, with your first kid, you're doing the best you can and you don't know. And there's no completely educational book that's going to tell you, hey, this is how you parent, this is how you raise children. By the time you have a second kid or more, it's like, hey, we learned this the hard way with the first child, and we're gonna self-correct and we're gonna improve. We're getting reps. And the same thing, we could talk about business. The point here is that when it comes to leadership, what type of rep makes you better? And the answer is decision reps. Like, that's the whole point of this chat today, is that decision reps is what makes a leader improve. Ultimately, if you were to say, hey, what does a leader do? A simple way to break down leadership is a leadership responsibility. A leader solves problems and makes decisions. And so if you want a leader to increase their leadership skill, then they need to be solving problems. They need to be ultimately making decisions. And so how do you increase leadership skill? Is you get decision reps. You get repetitions at making decisions. And I like to think of it like this. I heard a guy say, you cannot microwave leadership maturity. In other words, there's no shortcuts to becoming a better leader. If you want to become a better leader, then it requires that you make decisions, that you have the repetition, the opportunity for decision reps. So in business, if you are a high achieving business owner, and you're the one that runs every meeting, you approve every decision, and then you're looking around wondering, hey, why can my team not function without me? Then it's because you're not leading, you're just talking, you're just lecturing your team instead of deploying them, instead of raising up leaders around you. Which brings us to our second point, because in today's world, our culture loves to overteach and under-deploy. Why is that a problem? Because when you're actually deployed, when you're given the chance to make the decision, to get a decision repetition, what's happening is you are learning discernment. Which brings us to our second point, that discernment matters more than perfect decisions. The goal is never perfect decisions. The goal is to train discernment. And when you think about a leadership skill, you're developing that skill through repetition. As you do that, you are learning discernment. You don't learn the judgment skill, the discernment skill that aspect of leadership simply by reading a book or listening to another podcast or taking a course and studying the thing. That is a trained skill that you learn by doing. And so the discernment aspect of leadership, it only comes through decision reps. And so I think of things like in the Air Force, there's something that we use called the OODA loop, and it's OODA, and this stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And it's a loop that it provides feedback to you as you make decisions. And the point is that when you choose to act, you have observed what's going on, you've oriented yourself to that situation, you've made the decision. And when you get that decision rep, you take action, and the results of your action are going to give you feedback, and it's going to teach you, did you discern properly when you made your decision? And if not, you're going to learn. And that's something that it is simple, and we use it in dogfighting. It's more complex when you use it with more human element, where there's a lot of emotions involved, where there's risk that you are trying to account for in your decisions, that hopefully the OODA loop is a framework for decision making that can help you. Another thing to consider when we talk about discernment is, I heard a guy say, decision quality information. And so whenever we make a decision to get a decision rep, what do we need? We need information. And most of the time, we make decisions with incomplete information. And you've heard people say, hey, hindsight is 20/20, because when you're looking back, you usually have or are able to acquire complete information. But when you're in the moment and you're trying to make a decision rep right now, you're looking around and you're saying, I don't have all the information. With the information I do have, I'm going to make this decision. And so as we consider that is training us to have discernment, as we're like, hey, I'm still making a decision, even though I don't have a full picture, I'm going to make the decision anyway. And some people, they prioritize full information, and that leads them down an analysis paralysis, as some say, where they're just paralyzed and they won't make a decision because they don't have enough information. And on the other hand, there are people that are very fast and they speed through their decision. And I like to be not necessarily in the middle, more on the left side. Hey, I want to be closer to the speed aspect, because I think when you are taking the initiative, that you are forcing the circumstance to respond to you instead of you having to wait for it to happen and you react. You're the one driving your game plan. And the idea here is, as you are learning discernment, then one of the things to consider is, I don't have all the information, I'm going to still make this decision. And that speed favors you as you do that, instead of sitting around and waiting and trying to get all the information before you act. Oftentimes, I find that to be less successful. Now, when we look at this, I do want to highlight that the idea is to pursue excellence, not to demand perfection. And with my faith background, this looks like a grace-based performance culture that is rigorous, not ruthless, as I had one of my commanders tell me one time. The point is, I want to hold a high standard, but I'm not a taskmaster. I pursue excellence. I don't demand perfection. Now, there are obviously going to be times where the people that are under me, they make a bad decision. And so that decision rep, it is a failure, but it's not a moral failure. It's just the cost of tuition, if you will, at Leadership University. And so take the story I told where the JTAC, the young guy, he made a bad decision. And then I got to coach him through and say, okay, let's learn from that. Now, with that, let's consider the third point here, that overprotective leaders create passive followers. Now, I could have very well intervened beforehand and said, absolutely not. And some people would look at the price tag and say, you should have done that. And we can talk about that. But the point is that I said, no, I'm going to give him the opportunity. I'm going to honor him and trust him with the decision. I'm going to give him a decision rep because I want to create a leader here. I don't want to generate a passive follower. So catch this. If a leader hoards all the decisions, then what they're doing is they create dependence on them by their entire organization, their entire team. And so here's what a lot of leaders miss, is that you cannot give someone responsibility without giving them the authority to go with it, okay? So I call this commensurate authority. If I'm going to tell you, like, hey, you are responsible for this decision, then I'm going to give you the authority to make that decision. Because responsibility without the authority to make the decision, it sets people up for failure. And that is not leadership development. It's just task management with extra steps involved, where I'm the one that's centrally in command and you have to come report to me and get permission from me. That's very inefficient and not what we're going for. So if you are one of those overprotective leaders, then I'm calling you out. If you're the type of leader who says you want leaders under you, but emotionally you can't tolerate mistakes, then you're just creating passive followers within your organization. You're squashing initiative. You are killing creativity. You are destroying efficiency. And as leaders, we must give decision reps to subordinates to develop their leadership capability. This applies to business owners. This applies to fathers, to coaches, to pastors, to military leaders, especially. It applies to all of us that are in any capacity as a leader. And the point is that if your subordinate, if they never get to decide, then they never get to lead. They don't grow as a leader. And so what would be holding you back? Why are certain leaders overprotective and they hoard all the decision making for themselves? That's a good question to ask. Why would we not give our subordinates a shot, give them a chance at a decision opportunity? Why would we not give them decision reps? And sometimes there's wisdom to not, right? Like there may be, if failure occurs, it would be so catastrophic that death could be involved or unrecoverable financial loss could be involved. Obviously, there's times where it's like, hey, there's a reason I'm in charge. As the leader, I handle the risk. Within that, I can say, okay, and I have decided this is low enough risk that I trust you to make this decision. But even at that lower level of risk, if I'm not entrusting my subordinates to make decisions, it could be several things that are driving me, like a fear of mistakes or like ego disguised as a standard of excellence, where I'm telling myself, hey, it's because we value excellence, but actually it's my ego that is refusing to entrust other people to make decisions. Or I could have control issues. I could be really insecure and just want to control everything and say, this is mine. It must be done my way. Now, I don't say this from a place of leadership theory or academic opinion. I have seen leadership developed under life or death pressure where mistakes had real consequences, which leads us to our fourth point, that appropriate risk is necessary for growth. Okay, so the story that I started with, the JTAC story, the key is that I did not allow recklessness. I allowed responsibility, but is only responsible for me as a leader, allowing the younger JTAC to increase his responsibility. It's only responsible for both of us if I followed through with a coaching moment if he failed. And he made a bad decision, and so that decision rep failed, and it is completely lost if I don't follow through to coach him, to instruct him, to critique him, give him feedback on how to get better. Now, after he hit the target, but didn't neutralize the target, which is the whole point, so effectively it was mission fail, not mission success, I had the perfect opportunity to coach him and provide instruction on how to pair weapons against targets. And that happens when you understand what is the target composition and what are my weapon capabilities. What is the problem I'm trying to solve, and what are the strengths, the assets, the tools that I have at my disposal that I can bring and leverage to solve this problem. And by studying and understanding the problem, and then knowing the strengths, the teammates, the assets, the keys that I have at my disposal, then I can bring those two together and actually solve the problem, neutralize the target. All right, catch this. Weak leaders eliminate risk, but wise leaders contain risk. Okay, so what does that mean? Weak leaders eliminate risk. Why is that a bad thing? If you eliminate risk, that is no environment in which to develop, to raise up other leaders. Instead, we contain it, we make it manageable, and then at the appropriate risk level, then we are able to grow other leaders by letting them make decisions. So where I work, this is done in a training environment where there's certain things that the risk of training, if it exceeds a certain level of risk, we're like, this is training only. We're not at war. This is not something that is worth doing right now. In other words, the guy that's actually in charge or the girl that's actually in charge, they have decided, okay, we have calculated this risk and we decide we're going to entrust these more junior experienced individuals to make a lower level decision and give them that repetition at decision. In other words, we have to be okay to allow consequences. So when that other person that we're trying to develop as a leader, when they make a decision, then we allow the consequences, good or bad, and that we need to make sure it's appropriate, that it's not going to be devastating results. And then we must follow through and have coaching afterward. Like that's the whole point. If we let them make a decision rep and it is not perfect, and then we don't circle back and have good coaching, then it's a wasted opportunity. Now, we see this example from Jesus, right? He leads his disciples like this in Mark chapter 9. He sent them out to advance his kingdom, and they attempted to drive out an unclean spirit from a young boy, but they failed. And when they failed, Jesus didn't embarrass them. He coached them through it because Jesus was building leaders. So the question is, what about you? Are you building leaders who take initiative, who solve problems? And are you doing that because you are courageous enough to let them take a risk and fail and then coach them through failure? Or are you eliminating risk and denying your people a chance to try? And then if they fail, are you crushing your people for it? Because if you're doing the second, then you should expect passive followers who just sit around and wait for instruction. So that brings us to the fifth point, guys. The last point is that multiplication versus dependence. Whatever we're doing as leaders is directly causing either multiplication or dependence. A leader's job, your job as a leader, is not to stay needed forever. You don't want your people dependent on you. You want to multiply leadership ability. You want to impart leadership skill by giving the opportunity for those around you to get a chance at making decisions, to get decision reps. Now, this applies everywhere. It applies to your family, to your faith, to whatever organization you're part of within your marriage. There are certain things in my marriage that my wife does, and there's certain things that I do. And I'm like, hey, this would be a lot more efficient if you own this and you make the decisions over here. And then on this, I make the decisions over here. And that way we don't have to go to the other person out of this unhealthy level of dependence, but we're able to multiply. It happens in parenting. It happens in business. Obviously, it happens in the military. It happens in discipleship. Now, how can you tell if you are multiplying leadership around you or if you're creating this unhealthy dependence on you? Well, if you look around and your organization collapses without you, then you have built dependence, not leadership. Because real leaders create other leaders. That's the punchline for today. So we talked about that our responsibility as leaders is to create other leaders. And that happens through repetition, not through information. And what kind of rep? It is a decision rep. And within that decision rep, what is the most important thing that your people are learning? They're learning discernment. And that is more important than a perfect decision. But it only happens when we circle back and coach. Now, if you're an overprotective leader, then what you're doing is you are centralizing all the decisions for yourself. You're hoarding them for you. And what you're doing is you're creating passive followers. You are you're stunting the growth of the leaders around you. You're denying them the chance to develop their own leadership skill, which is a overprotective, AKA horribly selfish and naive and short-sighted path. And then the fourth point we talked about is that appropriate risk is necessary for growth of individuals that are developing their leadership skill. And then finally, we talked about multiplication versus dependence and how can you tell? If all your people rely completely on you, you have created a system that is dependent on you, that is highly inefficient, and the moment you leave, the whole thing collapses. Versus if you multiply leadership skill, you give those opportunities for decision reps to your people, then you are multiplying. So that's it. I look forward to seeing you guys in our next video. I want you to lead bravely and trust your people with the honor of making decisions. Stay lethal.